Part 3, Diplomatic Complications. Absolutely not. Director Faulkner's voice cut through the research lab like a laser. This goes beyond cultural immersion, Pierce. This is a complete violation of research protocols. Hayden stood his ground beside the holographic display of Zephyrian neurological patterns he'd been studying. With respect, Director, this is an unprecedented opportunity to understand a fundamental aspect of Zephyrian consciousness that's been hidden from us until now. Colonel Westfield, the military liaison to the scientific mission, leaned against the lab table with arms crossed. His weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed interest. The strategic implications are worth considering. If these triadic bonds affect their decision-making processes, it could explain why our diplomatic efforts have stalled in certain areas. This isn't about diplomacy or research, Faulkner countered, her silver-streaked hair catching the light as she turned to face Westfield. This is about maintaining boundaries. Pierce is proposing to enter into what amounts to a marriage with 3 aliens. A cultural exchange, Hayden corrected. I haven't agreed to anything permanent. Dr. Namdi, the expedition's lead xenobiologist, looked up from his data pad. The neurological implications alone warrant investigation. We've never encountered a species with natural telepathic abilities that extend beyond momentary contact. It's not telepathy, Hayden explained, grateful for Namdi's support. It's more like shared processing. They remain individuals but with constant awareness of each other's emotional states and thoughts. Faulkner pinched the bridge of her nose. And you want to join this hive mind? It's not a hive mind either, Hayden said, frustration creeping into his voice. And no, I'm not joining anything. I'm exploring their cultural practices to better understand. Your objectivity is compromised, Faulkner interrupted. You've developed feelings for the Zephyrian liaison. Don't deny it, it's obvious to everyone at this outpost. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Hayden felt heat rising to his face but maintained eye contact with the director. My personal feelings don't invalidate the scientific merit of this investigation, he finally said. Colonel Westfield straightened. I say we let him proceed, with monitoring and regular debriefings. When Faulkner began to protest, he held up a hand. Think about it, Director. The Zephyrians chose Pierce for this revelation. That alone tells us something important about how they perceive us and our mission here. Faulkner's shoulders sagged slightly, the closest she ever came to admitting defeat. Fine. But at the first sign that this is affecting your judgment or compromising our position here, I'm pulling you out and sending you back to Earth. Understood? Understood, Hayden agreed, relief washing over him. Later that evening, as Hayden walked through the garden separating the human settlement from the Zephyrian city, he noticed subtle changes in the bioluminescent flora. Plants that normally glowed blue were tinged with purple near his path. They respond to emotional disturbance, came Talia's melodic voice as she emerged from behind a floating rock formation. Her violet-tinged sensory filaments seemed to mirror the altered plants. Your people are troubled by our proposal, she stated rather than asked. Hayden nodded. Humans value individual relationships. The concept of bonding with multiple connected beings is challenging for them. Talia's 3 eyes blinked in sequence rather than unison, a gesture Hayden had learned indicated contemplation. Yet your species forms collectives in many ways, families, communities, nations. You understand connection. It's different, Hayden tried to explain. Those connections don't involve consciousness sharing. Perhaps that is why your people struggle with conflict. Talia moved her lower arms in a gesture that caused the nearby plants to intensify their glow. Without sharing another's perspective directly, empathy remains intellectual rather than experienced. Hayden considered this. That's actually profound. I sense you formed a deeper connection with Lyria than with Nissa or myself, Talia observed without judgment. I've known her longer, Hayden admitted. But after experiencing the reflection chamber, I'm beginning to understand that knowing one of you means knowing aspects of all of you. Talia's sensory filaments rippled with approval. Understanding grows between us, Hayden Soul. Come. Nissa wishes to show you something in the ancestral archives that may help bridge our differences. Part 4, Harmonious Convergence. The ancestral archives of Zephoria lay beneath the city, housed in a vast chamber where crystalline data structures stored millennia of history. Hayden followed Nissa through rows of humming crystals, each pulsing with stored memories and knowledge. Few humans have been permitted here, Nissa explained, her amber filaments illuminating their path. Our history with other species has been complex. I'm honored, Hayden said, genuinely awed by the living library surrounding them. Each crystal seemed to respond to Nissa's presence, brightening as she passed. Here, she said, stopping before a particularly ancient formation. Its surface was weathered, suggesting it predated most of the collection. This contains the first recorded interaction between Zephorians and another spacefaring species. Nissa placed all 4 hands on the crystal's surface. It responded immediately, projecting a 3-dimensional scene into the air between them. Hayden watched as ethereal figures, clearly Zephorians, though somewhat different in appearance, encountered tall, reptilian beings. The Vorden, Nissa narrated. They visited our world 2,000 years ago. Like humans, they could not comprehend our triadic bonds. Unlike humans, they saw it as a threat. The scene shifted, showing conflict, weapons being drawn, destruction of Zephorian structures. They feared what they could not understand, she continued. They believed our consciousness sharing meant we would inevitably absorb their minds as well. Hayden watched the historical record with growing unease. What happened to them? They left, eventually. But not before significant harm was done. The projection showed the aftermath, damaged cities, mourning Zephorians. Since then, we have been cautious about revealing the true nature of our consciousness to outsiders. Until now, Hayden said quietly. Until me. Nissa's 3 eyes focused intently on him. Lyria sensed something different in you from your first meeting. A willingness to see beyond your own perspective that is rare among individuals from singular consciousness species. Before Hayden could respond, an alarm echoed through the chamber. The crystals pulsed red in unison, and Nissa's filaments stood rigid with alarm. The security barrier has been breached, she said, already moving toward the exit. Something is wrong at the surface. They emerged from the archives to chaos. The night sky above the city was illuminated by emergency lights from the human settlement. Hayden activated his comm unit. Pierce to command. What's happening? Colonel Westfield's voice came through, tense and clipped. Atmospheric anomaly appeared 20 minutes ago. Some kind of electrical storm, but it's not behaving according to normal patterns. It's interfering with our defensive systems. As if summoned by the description, the sky split open with branches of crimson lightning unlike anything Hayden had seen before. One bolt struck a floating rock formation near the city's edge, shattering it and sending fragments raining down on the structures below. Lyria and Talia appeared, running toward them. The harmony is disrupted, Talia called out. These are not natural phenomena. Another lightning strike hit dangerously close to the human settlement. Hayden's scientific training warred with his growing concern for both communities. Your people have equipment that can analyze the storm pattern, Nissa stated. Ours can manipulate the atmospheric resonance. We must coordinate. Director Faulkner will never agree to share our technology, Hayden said. Not without going through proper channels. There is no time, Lyria insisted as another bolt struck, this time hitting one of the crystal spires of the city. The structure didn't shatter but instead began to pulse with absorbed energy, growing dangerously bright. That spire houses our atmospheric stabilizers, Talia explained urgently. If it overloads, Both our communities are at risk, Nissa finished. Hayden made a quick decision. I'll get you access to our meteorological data. But we'll need to convince both Faulkner and your city's leaders to work together. The three sisters exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Then, in perfect unison, they each extended a hand toward Hayden. There is another way, they said together. A temporary linking through the triadic bond. Your mind connected to ours to bridge the two communities. A dangerous option, Lyria added. But one that would allow immediate coordination. What would it involve? Hayden asked, watching as another lightning bolt illuminated the chaos spreading through both communities. Trust, Talia answered simply. And surrender to something larger than yourself. Part 2, The Sisters 3. The Convergence Temple rose from the center of the Zephorian city like a massive crystal geode turned inside out. Its walls shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and flowed in response to the emotions of those who entered. Hayden felt the subtle vibration through his boots as he approached the ornate archway. Your heart rhythm betrays nervousness, came a voice similar to Lyria's but with a deeper resonance. Hayden turned to find a Zephorian with the same opalescent skin as Lyria, but her sensory filaments were tinted with amber hues instead of Lyria's blue. Her middle eye seemed to focus more intently on him than the other two. You must be one of Lyria's sisters, Hayden said, instinctively extending his hand before remembering this wasn't a Zephorian greeting custom. I am Nissa, she confirmed, making the traditional Zephorian greeting, a gentle wave of her upper arms while the lower arms remained still. I maintain our historical archives and serve as keeper of ancestral memories. Before Hayden could respond, another voice joined them. And I am Talia, the third aspect. This Zephorian had violet-tinged filaments that seemed to dance with more energy than her sisters. I interpret the cosmic harmonies and guide our people's spiritual practices. Hayden looked between the two sisters, noting the subtle differences in their appearances and mannerisms despite their identical physiological structure. It's an honor to meet you both. Lyria has told me about your connection. Told, but not shown, came Lyria's voice as she emerged from within the temple. Words are insufficient for understanding the triadic bond. The three sisters formed a perfect triangle around Hayden, their sensory filaments beginning to glow in synchrony. We are distinct individuals, Nissa explained, her historian's precision evident in her careful choice of words. Yet we share a consciousness deeper than your people's concept of family or even identical twins, Talia continued. When one feels joy, all feel it, Lyria completed. When one learns, all know. Our bodies are separate vessels, but the essence within flows between us freely. Hayden's scientific curiosity overrode his initial discomfort. Is this common among your people? These triadic relationships? Rare, Nissa answered. Perhaps one birth in 1,000 produces triadic offspring. We are considered touched by the cosmic harmony. Special, but not superior, Talia clarified. Simply different in our perception of existence. Lyria gestured toward the temple entrance. Come. There is a chamber designed for interspecies understanding. The interior of the temple was even more impressive than its exterior. Crystalline structures captured and refracted light in impossible ways, creating spaces that seemed larger inside than physical dimensions should allow. They entered a circular room where a shallow pool of luminescent liquid covered the floor, barely an inch deep. The reflection chamber, Talia explained. It allows limited consciousness sharing between different species. Limited? Hayden asked, suddenly apprehensive. It will not harm you, Nissa assured him. The liquid conducts emotional impressions only. You will sense our triadic nature without losing your individual identity. Think of it as an empathic translation, Lyria added. Hayden hesitated only briefly before removing his boots as the sisters did. The liquid was warm and tingled against his skin as they all stood in the shallow pool, forming a circle. Close your eyes, Talia instructed. Release your preconceptions about separation and unity. Hayden complied, feeling slightly foolish until a wave of sensation washed over him. It began as a whisper at the edges of his consciousness, the faintest impression of existing in multiple places simultaneously. Then it grew stronger, a gentle current of shared awareness flowing between distinct points of perspective. He gasped as he briefly experienced the world through 3 sets of eyes, felt the weight of ancestral knowledge that Nissa carried, the spiritual connection to the cosmos that defined Talia, and the diplomatic bridge-building passion that drove Lyria. When he opened his eyes, the sisters were watching him with identical expressions of gentle curiosity. That was. Hayden struggled to find the right words. Like being one person looking through different windows, but each window showed a completely different landscape. A simplified approximation, Nissa acknowledged, but more accurate than most humans achieve on first exposure. Part 1, First Contact on Zephoria. The crystalline spires of Nova Haven gleamed under the crimson light of Zephoria's binary stars. Dr. Hayden Pierce adjusted his atmospheric filter as he stepped out onto the observation platform. After 18 months on this alien world, he still found himself breathless at the sight of the floating rock formations and the bioluminescent vegetation that pulsed with life in the valley below. Still admiring the view, Doctor? The voice behind him belonged to Director Faulkner, the stern-faced administrator of the Human Research Outpost. It's why we came all this way, isn't it? Hayden replied, not bothering to hide his enthusiasm. 63 light-years from Earth to study the most advanced non-human civilization we've ever encountered. Faulkner made a non-committal sound. Just remember your primary directive, Pierce. Study their culture, don't become part of it. Hayden nodded, though his mind was already drifting to his afternoon meeting with Lyria, the Zephorian cultural liaison assigned to his research team. Their conversations had gradually shifted from formal exchanges of information to something more personal, more meaningful. The director's footsteps receded, leaving Hayden alone with his thoughts and the alien landscape. He checked his translator implant, a small device behind his ear that had taken months to properly calibrate to the complex harmonics of the Zephorian language. Later that day, Hayden made his way through the bioluminescent gardens that separated the human settlement from the Zephorian city. The natives had insisted on this buffer zone, not out of fear or distrust, but because they believed transitions between different energies required space for harmonization. Lyria waited for him by the resonance pools, her opalescent skin reflecting the water's blue glow. Like all Zephorians, she had 4 arms, each ending in 6 slender fingers, and a crest of sensory filaments that framed her face like a living crown. Her eyes, 3 of them arranged in a triangle, blinked in synchrony when she spotted him. Hayden Soul, she greeted him, using the Zephorian honorific that acknowledged one's inner essence rather than merely their physical form. Lyria, he responded with a slight bow. The gardens are particularly vibrant today. They respond to emotional frequencies, she explained, gesturing to a cluster of flowers that seemed to pulse in time with their conversation. They sense anticipation. Hayden raised an eyebrow. Anticipation of what? Lyria's sensory filaments rippled, the equivalent of a human drawing a deep breath before speaking. I wish to propose a union between us. The translator implant faltered for a moment, searching for the nearest human concept. Hayden felt his pulse quicken. A union? You mean, relationship? A bonding, Lyria clarified. What humans might call marriage, though that word carries insufficient meaning for what I propose. Hayden felt his scientific objectivity warring with the emotional attachment he'd developed for Lyria over the past year. I'm honored, but there are protocols about interspecies relations, and cultural differences that. You misunderstand, Lyria interrupted gently. The proposal is not merely from me. She gestured toward the city, where the tallest spire pulsed with an inner light. It is from us. Us? Hayden repeated, confusion evident in his voice. My sisters and I, Anissa, Talia, and myself. We are soul-bonded, a triad formed in the sacred waters before birth. In our culture, to bond with one is to bond with all. We are separate beings, yet one essence. Hayden stared at her, struggling to process her words. You're asking me to marry all three of you? Lyria's head tilted, her central eye blinking slowly. Your language lacks precision for this concept. It is not three separate unions, but one union with a three-aspect soul. We share consciousness, sensation, and emotion, though we maintain individual identities and purposes. I've studied hundreds of Zephyrian customs, Hayden said, his anthropologist's mind racing to recall any mention of this practice. This wasn't in any of the cultural briefings. It would not be, Lyria said, her voice melodic and patient. The nature of triadic bonding is considered sacred knowledge, shared only when a deep connection has formed. Your people have been here only a short time, by our reckoning. Hayden paced along the edge of the resonance pool, his reflection fragmenting in the ripples. Even if I wanted to consider this, my superiors would never approve. Director Faulkner already thinks I'm too involved in my research. Is Director Faulkner bonded to you? Lyria asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Despite his confusion, Hayden laughed. No, nothing like that. But she has authority over my position here. On Zephyria, no one has authority over matters of soul bonding, Lyria said. It is between the individuals and the cosmic harmony. Hayden stopped pacing and faced her. I need to understand more. About your sisters, about this bond you share, about what this union would mean. Lyria's sensory filaments glowed with approval. Understanding should precede decision. Will you meet with all of us? Tomorrow, at the Convergence Temple? The scientific part of Hayden's brain screamed that this was crossing every professional boundary, while another part, the part that had been drawn to the mysteries of Zephyria and to Lyria herself, was already curious, already considering. I'll be there, he found himself saying. No commitments, just exploration. Exploration is the foundation of wisdom, Lyria said, touching her upper right hand to her central eye in a gesture of respect. Until tomorrow, Hayden Soul. As she departed, the bioluminescent flowers along the path seemed to follow her movement, creating waves of light that rippled outward. Hayden stood motionless, watching until she disappeared into the city. Back in his quarters, Hayden paced restlessly before finally accessing the research database. Computer, display all information on Zephyrian triadic bonding. The system hummed. No specific entries found on triadic bonding. Related terms, Zephyrian reproduction, social structure, consciousness sharing.